So this is sometimes one of the most overlooked things when you're starting seeds, and that is hardening your plants off. And what do I mean by that? So your little seedlings have been growing in your nice warm garage or in your house by a windowsill. They've been nice and warm. They've been used to a very consistent temperature. I mean, even in the wintertime, your house temperature is going to vary by maybe 10 degrees, probably between 60 and 70 degrees in a day. They're going to be used to lots of light, probably 14 or 16 hours of light a day is what you're going to be giving those plants. And they're kind of spoiled. They've been getting fertilizer. They haven't had any wind. They haven't had any freezing temperatures or anything like that. And so they're kind of spoiled. And if you were to take those plants out and stick them in the garden, they're not going to do very well because they're going to be all of a sudden stressed out by this change in environment. They're going to go from the nice warm environment to a rough real world, and they need a little time to adjust. So they need to kind of stop being teenagers and go to college type thing and warm up a little bit. So the way we do that is by hardening the plants off. So about a week before you're planning on planting them outside, you need to start thinking about hardening these plants off. And some people will say it takes even longer than a week. Some people will harden them off over a 2-week period, and that's fine. I've found that in the springtime, 7 to 10 days is sufficient to get them hardened because the springtime temperatures are not as extreme. You're usually pretty good with wind and things like that. So I found that about 7 to 10 days is good enough in hardening them off for the springtime. Now, if we're talking about summertime transplants or fall transplants, because usually say for example, we've got some broccoli transplants. We probably planted those on June 15th, and now it's August 1st, and it's time to start thinking about getting those outside. Well, what's the weather like in August in most parts of the northern hemisphere? It's usually pretty hot, and broccoli doesn't particularly care for that kind of temperature, and so we have to make sure that we slowly acclimate them. So is what you do to slowly acclimate a plant is bring it out for the first day, maybe just a few hours, maybe 2 or 3 hours in the shade, okay, and the next day you make it 6, and the next day you make it 8, and all of those days are in the shade. And then the next day you put them somewhere where they're going to get some sun for 2 or 3 hours and then shade for the rest of the day. And you just slowly and gradually get them till they're in a condition where they would be in the garden. So that way they have a chance to, get acclimated. And I even encourage people to do this with your nursery bought starts as well, because those plants have not been hardened off. Chances are, especially if you go on a day when they've just been delivered, those plants have come straight from one greenhouse into another greenhouse, and if you take them and go home and plant them in your yard that day, they're going to have, they're going to have all kinds of shock because of that. And it's already a shock to the plant system to be transplanted and put into the ground, and you don't want to add environmental shock and stress to it. So any plant you need to harden off for at least a week to 10 days. So gradually bring it in, and some people will take their starts and move them instead of having them in the house, they may move them out to a sunny covered porch or something like that for a couple of days. So the point is to gradually bring those plants outside and get them used to the conditions outside. Now, the one thing that you have to be very careful with is water. Because you'll take them outside and put them in the shade, or maybe you'll move them to the spot where they're going to have 3 hours of sun. Well, all of a sudden, 3 hours of sun will dry that soil out really quick. And there's no chance for them to get out into the soil and like they will in the garden and find some more water. So you've got to be very careful. So if you're not going to be around for the day, you might want to water them in the morning and make sure that they have. This would be the only time that I might encourage overwatering a little bit, because the last thing you want is for those starts to dry out. They'll just totally get set back. Even if they don't, it doesn't kill them. Getting dried out for a day will just set them back big time. I had some broccoli one time that I goofed and left them out for a day, and they got dry. It didn't kill them. When I watered them, they were all wilty. When I watered them, they came back, but man, that year our broccoli was 3 weeks later than it usually is because I had goofed up and done that. So make sure that you water them and make sure that those plants get plenty of time to get acclimated to being outside. And sometimes people will use cold frames as well. That's a good way. If you've got a cold frame in your garden, you can bring them from the house to the cold frame, maybe leave them outside in the cold frame during the day and bring them back in at night for a while. And, but eventually the last couple of days before I put them in the garden, they're spending the whole day outside and the whole night outside. Now, if it's like tomatoes or something like that and it's still cool, I would treat them just like I might in the garden. So I would cover them with a fabric row cover or a wall of water or something like that. But you want them to get used to being outside at whatever condition they are. So that's hardening off, and it's one of the most important parts of seed starting. If you don't do it, you're going to regret it, because even if it doesn't kill your starts, it will set them back weeks because they have to spend all that time adapting to the conditions in the garden and trying to survive instead of thriving and growing. So please make sure you harden your plants off.